I will call this meeting of the Prince William County Electoral Board to order. If you would all please rise for a moment of silence and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thank you all very much for joining us. The first item of business is approval of the minutes for our last meeting. Do we have a motion?
I make a motion we approve the minutes as written for the last meeting.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Passed unanimously, so can I have these? Okay, so now we dive right into report from electoral board members. Mr. Secretary, do you have anything?
Good morning. As I've said before, it can never be said that we lived in uninteresting times. And it seems like every day something new or exciting or interesting is happening. And since we last met last month, that has certainly proved to be the case. In the realm of elections, we've seen the President sign an executive order. We have a number of pieces of legislation that have come out of our own General Assembly here in Virginia, as well as some actions by our County Board of Supervisors that have all of which have potential impacts to the way we administer elections. And we'll be talking about some of that later this morning. I know it's part of the General Registrar's report. And I'm sure there are strong feelings in the room, as well as across the state and across the country on all of those things. But I think that the Prince William County citizens should be reassured that it remains the mission of this board to be as nonpartisan and objective as possible, allowing the representatives that you have elected to set the policy. And we remain committed to doing our due diligence to ensuring within the confines of the Constitution, the Code of Virginia, and the eligible voting population of Prince William County, to do everything that we can to ensure that our elections are as safe, open, fair, honest, secure, and transparent as possible. Thank you.
Okay. Madam Vice Chair, any?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. My colleague has stolen a lot of my thunder. I would associate myself 100% with his comments. This is now my third meeting, and in the meantime, I have attended the Virginia Electoral Board Association, that's VEBA, annual conference, which was March 22nd through the 25th down in Hot Springs, Virginia. And for me as a new board member, it was especially informative and educational to learn about the various things that I have been trying to study up on since I was named an electoral board member, and appreciated the time and effort that went into all of those sessions. It was very instructive and informative for me. I appreciate Eric's guidance in terms of helping me understand the Virginia code for the election, and now the General Registrar and Electoral Board Member Handbook, which I will be reading extensively. And Marcus also mentioned this important executive order that the President recently, introduced it on March 25 about election reform. And so it's a topic that is at the forefront of many people's minds across the country, and especially here in Virginia and Prince William County. And so as we can do our work here in making sure that we can conduct elections in Prince William County with the confidence that it is legal, fair, open, transparent, that is what we endeavor to do here, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right. I will just say that I probably don't have the same level of enthusiasm for the executive order that the President signed. You know, I mean, it's our job to administer elections based on the law. But you know, the Constitution gives state legislatures and Congress the authority to write laws about how elections are conducted. And the only role the president has is to sign or veto congressional legislation. So while it encourages discussion among people across the country, there are already lawsuits filed against it. So, you know, we'll just leave it there. Whatever shakes out, both from Richmond and from DC, it's our job to administer based on those laws. So that's what we'll do. So let's jump into the General Registrar's report.
Okay, so election preparation for the 2025 primaries, and I say primaries because we have both a Democratic and a Republican primary for all Prince William voters this election. Wanted to update the board on our task progress, so you all have in your packet there a listing of how far along we are with our tasks. Should be this sheet. I think the order got a little messed up. All right. So we have a listing there. So at current, we have 4 tasks that are behind deadline, but I think all those will be resolved or close to resolved after the meeting. Some of our items require approval of certain things by the board. So the things that are behind are just elements that we have to finalize a few things after some discussions and approvals today. We do have 17 tasks that are ahead of schedule at the moment, so that's really great to see. I think everything is progressing as it should be, and we're still pretty early, so it's good to not be behind at this point. And then I'll provide another update to that at the next board meeting, as well as notify the board of any, issues and things that arise over the coming weeks. We will have, before the next board meeting, a few critical things. The candidate deadline is coming up shortly, and once that happens, there is a rapid process to try to get the ballots ready. So I do have a sample ballot that I'll be sending today or tomorrow to the board, so you all can have an idea of what that looks like in case you have any feedback for that. We are limited by the standards of the state, so a lot of the items that are on there are very prescribed in the code. We do get questions about that from some of our voters sometimes, who say, well, why did you guys design, and it's a lot of it is by design in the code. But if I can get that to you all in advance so that we can, if you guys have any concerns or feedback, we can address that now, because I know once the candidate deadline ends, it is a sprint to get those ballots, because the time between the candidate deadline and early voting and mail voting starting is just a few weeks. So that's always a little bit of a hustle for us to get that all done. So any questions about the tasks or any concerns?
So I think we discussed at the last meeting, generally the law now requires both political parties to choose their nominees by a primary rather than caucus or whatever. And I think there was a lawsuit. One of the Republican congressional district committees filed a lawsuit to allow them to do a caucus or convention. Do you know what the status of that lawsuit is? Or
I haven't heard any updates. I read the article on that several weeks ago. The law basically just states that if you're going to have a primary election, that you have to have certain components of it. And I think the challenge is that for a party to have all those elements creates a lot of logistics, whereas we're already well positioned to do that. So I know there has been some objections, so I don't, at least when we were at the conference, I believe the commissioner said we are going to be having primaries. So at least in her view, and it looks like the state is of the opinion that will not succeed, but I have no idea what that court will will decide ultimately. And if it does decide that, how that would impact Prince William County specifically. So obviously we've seen a number of time-sensitive lawsuits in the last couple of years. And this is another one of those, so we will see what plays out, and, I'll notify the board if that changes at all, and obviously we would, want to get word out to voters if anything changed, but at least at this point, we're planning to be prepared to hold both primaries, as is our task at this current moment. So, any other questions about our tasks or anything? Okay. The split precinct waiver. So this is something that we have to do each year. After we redistrict, we went from, I think, 27 or 29 splits. We had a lot of splits before. We went down to 2. So a split precinct is when you have overlapping districts in the same precinct. So let's say your precinct boundary has all of one magisterial district in it, but there is a state House of Delegates boundary that goes right through the middle of that precinct. Now, in some situations, we would just go ahead and make that another precinct. But the law allows that if there's less than 100 voters in that particular location, that you don't have to have another precinct, another polling place to put those voters in, that we can have them basically vote at that same precinct, but we just give the voters that come to that precinct the ballot depending on which congressional races or which state races they would have. So the 2 we have in Prince William, one is in Precinct 208 is a congressional split, so that would not apply to this election. So the one that would apply to this election is our State Senate House of Delegates split, which is in Precinct 604. Now this only affects 21 voters. That number was significantly higher, I think, around COVID. There's not really a residential homes there. There is a hotel or two, and I think there were some sort of short-term housing that was happening that has gotten lower and lower over the past couple years. So now it's down to just 21 voters. This is in that area right just across the street from the mall along 95. So we typically only see 1 or 2 or 3 voters from this split in something like a primary, but we will have ballots available for them should they come in. So this is a resolution that was passed by the Board of County Supervisors on March 18th. We have to submit that to them each year. They pass it, and then it goes to the State Electoral Board. I believe the State Board is meeting on April 8th, so they will likely approve that then. It's the same process that we have repeated for the last 3 years. So it's something on my list every December to get the paperwork together so that we get this approved prior to the primary election in June. So I will notify the board by email once we get that approval from the State Electoral Board. Any questions about the split precincts? Okay. All right, follow up on March business. At the March meeting, the board approved us changing the office hours, so we've updated that to close at 4:30. We updated that on Google, on the State Department of Elections website, on our website, on any sources we could find. That was due to the fact that we were having some confusion about early voting and our office hours, and also because we just get a very limited number of walk-ins at our office on any given week when it's not election time and when early voting is not active. The locations and dates that were approved by the board at the last meeting have been updated on our website, so all the information in terms of dates and deadlines for this election, where and when to go for early voting, is available on the website for this election. Early voting starts on, I believe, May 5th. Am I right? May 2nd, sorry. I flipped it. I don't know. I don't know what upside down dyslexia is, but that was what was in my brain there. So it starts on May 2nd, and then all of the satellite locations, that's when our office will open for early voting. All of the satellite locations are going to open for that last entire week. So Saturday to Saturday before Election Day, every day, all 8 days, all of our satellites will be open. And that will be all the locations that were open during the general as well. So Haymarket Library, Brentsville Historic Center, here at our office, the Ferlazzo Building, the DMV, and the Dumfries Community Center. So,
Including the Sunday in there, so we'll have eight.
yes,
eight
yeah,
straight
so it'll be
days.
8 straight days. So Saturday, and then the first Saturday, and then Saturday to Sunday, Sunday to Saturday, right up until 3 days before the election day. So some legislative updates. You all mentioned the executive order. I had some stuff in here on the slides. I took it out just because it's still pending right now. I think it's also worth noting that Congress is considering the SAVE legislation. I was trying to look up when they were doing that because I'd heard that was kind of imminent. And the SAVE legislation is very similar to the president's executive order. I'm not sure, I don't think it has quite as much language. I know there's some stuff about the EAC standards in the president's order, which I don't think the congressional language has, which makes sense because it's it's in the executive branch. So there's a lot of pending stuff there. There's the executive order that went out. There are court questions to be considered. There's the SAVE legislation. So I would imagine that over the next couple months that'll be sorted out. I do think it's worth noting that regarding the SAVE legislation and the executive order that went through, that we are not currently in a federal election this year. So I don't think that much that's in the executive order or in the SAVE legislation would impact this year's election outside of the provisions that relate to the EAC certification standards, which we're currently trying to get equipment. So that may cause some time shifting in that. And then also the one question is the ballot deadline, whether the ballots have to be received by election day or can be sent by election day. So the executive order says they have to be received by, as Virginia law used to be a few years ago. I know there was a Mississippi court case that upheld that not too long ago. So again, a lot of legal wranglings that we are waiting the
It's full
outcome
employment
of.
for the lawyers.
Huh?
It's full employment for the lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. So we will await those decisions and congressional actions, and then see what standards we have to implement, and see if that changes, what our voter registration process is or our mail voting process. But it shouldn't impact anything for this upcoming election. So we should have a little bit more information by the time we get around to our next election, or next year's federal elections. So, at the state level, there was a number of pieces of legislation that were passed and signed by the governor. SB 991 changes the registration deadline from 21 days before the election to 10 days. So this is kind of aligning the registration deadline now with when the last day to request a mail ballot is. So those will be lined up. I should note, these are all wouldn't be implemented until July. So for this election, our current laws, as were present in November, will still apply. So, so that is one item. The SB 1044 requires the reporting of provisional ballots by precinct. I'm pretty sure this passed with all yays and 0 nays in the state legislature. They all want more information on how voters are voting and to learn kind of at the precinct level, as we've seen with election day ballots, early voting ballots, all that kind of stuff. So that is coming this November as well.
One comment, one question on SB 991.
Yeah.
So the change to the deadline, theoretically, one would hope that would reduce the number of same-day registrations that we see, maybe. But in the past, have you noticed I guess the short way to ask the question is, how much of a crunch does that put on the Office of Elections then to process, your time to process those has been cut in half, right?
Of same-day registrations?
Not the same-day registrations, but the ones that are, you now only have 10 days where you used to have a 21-day period where you could deal with.
I don't think, either way, the last couple days is going to be a kind of a push in to get them in. Natalia, did you have any thoughts on that at all? Or?
It really won't affect us.
Okay.
So we prepared for that. We heard of it before. We just have to switch our priorities a little bit, but it would be fine. It was always a confusion for voters as well, because the deadline to request the ballot and deadline to register to vote, everyone heard that there is a deadline and they do everything at the same day. So it's just a little bit better aligning right now. So
Okay.
We'll see. We'll update you in November how it works.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, we'll find out in June a little bit. I do think that, yeah, it will reduce the number of same-day registrations a little bit. Early voting will only start, the same days at that 10-day mark. But I think the vast majority of those are happening on election day and towards the end of early voting. I guess by nature, if you've procrastinated your registration, then you're likely procrastinating and waiting till the end to go vote. So it might reduce it by 5 or 10%, but I think the majority of what we've seen for same-day registrations is toward the end of early voting and on election day itself. So, not too much relief for you all that I know have a crunch for that after the election.
Shoot for 4,000 or less.
Yeah. Well, I think you all will not see in June what you had to do in November. So, the SB 1002 prohibits the use of campaign funds for personal use. I think this was a loophole that had been talked about kind of closing up, and this is more kind of in alignment with the laws that are in most states now. SB 945 provides an appeal process for candidate financial disclosure penalties. So there's now a process set up for that, which is nice because sometimes we get complaints about that and we don't have really a lot of authority on that. So the fact that they've established that will be more helpful to our office. And then SB 1174 specifies language that things that can't be used to distribute in voting areas. So there's something about referendum, I think specifically, that they just needed to clarify something about what the literature that's handed out. So there were a few pieces of legislation that, a number of pieces that failed. I think there were something like 60 election-related bills this period. Most of them did not pass the legislature, and the governor did not sign or vetoed a few pieces of them. So not a lot of significant change going into next year.
So who files campaign finance reports with you? Just the county people, the supervisors?
They don't file with us at all. They actually file with the State Board of Elections.
So everybody files
Yeah, we just get
online.
the copies. So for the local candidates, for Prince William County candidates, we do get an automatic email saying somebody filed their campaign finance, and that's the ones that we monitor. So if they're late, if they haven't filed, that's the ones that we will issue penalties to. On the state level, state monitors it.
Right. Because I remember, back in the day, we used to be the group that would fine somebody if they didn't get their report in on time, and we'd have to
Yes.
call them and chase them down and please get your report in. We don't want to fine you, but,
Yes.
so they're all done electronically now by the state. So it's the state board that determines whether somebody's report is late.
For the state, candidates, for local candidates, it's still our responsibility, but they still file with the state. We just have to keep an eye on
Okay.
reports, yes.
Okay, so update on our budget. For FY '26, we still have that initiative for $2.4 million for new equipment. I did go to the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday, fielded questions. There were no questions for me. So that is usually, no news is good news on that front in terms of approval for that. Budget adoption is scheduled for April 22nd, so that is out of our hands, and the county supervisors will decide, make decisions about the budget, but I think that bodes well for us getting our new equipment. And that would be roughly a year from now, pending, EAC approval and a number of, other things that are still to be explored.
So the goal would be to have the new equipment in place by next June or next November?
Next June, most likely.
Okay.
I think the idea was that we would take acceptance after the November election at some point, December, January, February, somewhere in there when it's kind of low season and we have more time for staff to focus on that. That we would accept the equipment around there and then we would implement it at the primary. I think it's always nice to, implement new equipment in a primary when it's a lighter election. If you do discover you have some kind of issue or something like that, it's just a lot easier to deal with. The nice thing too with early voting being so long, one benefit is you get a chance to see the equipment in action kind of early. So if there are issues, you're going to know about them long before election day. So FY '25 progress. So we are currently a little over budget for our current fiscal year. We have identified some areas to save money. We've been working with OMB on this. I think it's a number of factors. One was just the overall costs of the presidential election. My predecessor had asked for $1 million for the 2020 presidential. I believe I asked for about just under $400,000 for the 2020 presidential. I probably should ask for about 530 or 540 now. So things you learn along the way. But we also had a couple years ago, we had to update all of our archived registration forms. We had to add them to Veris to have the electronic versions of all of those. And this should have been done before I even started here, but I kind of inherited that when I got here. We had set up a contractor to do that for us in FY '23 maybe, and at the last minute, the state said, you can't do that. We're no longer allowing contractors to complete that process. They sent me a letter as to such, and so we weren't able to spend that money. So some of the money, we've been under budget. I looked the other day, I think by $800,000 or $900,000 over the last 3 fiscal years. So we're probably going to be about $200,000, I would say, over for this fiscal year. So we're still pretty far to the good. I've talked with OMB. I've told them we've taken some steps to limit our number of temps for this election, to limit our OT, to make that overage as minimal as possible. I think we've gotten it down to where we're maybe only $150,000 or $175,000 over budget. So I'll continue to work with OMB on that. If it becomes a problem, or if I have to go to the supervisors at some point about it, I will let you all know. But I think we're doing okay at this point. You can see that online, by the way. They post our agency's budget on the budget and management page. They show quarterly updates, and agencies that are either behind budget or over budget have to provide explanations, and those explanations are in that report on the county website. We are almost always having to provide an explanation due to the nature of our work, because in our first quarter from July to September, we're under budget because we haven't had an election yet. And then November is our biggest budget expenditure of the year by far. So we are over budget. In fact, if we are usually about 60 to 62% at the halfway point in the year, that's really about the mark that we want to be at. I think we were at about 67 or 68%. Because we just don't spend as much in the primary. We don't have as many officers. We don't have as many early voting sites. We don't have to order as many ballots. There's just a lot of costs that are less. We have a lot fewer temps, and they're not working as many hours, the temps that we do have. So primaries are a lot cheaper. So we are behind each quarter by quarter. We are behind, ahead, behind, or a little on budget again, and then it usually ends up right around where it should be by the end of the year. So, but Roby and I are going to sit down after this election and look at our budget over, I think I've been here for 4 fiscal years now, technically, since I came in the middle of a fiscal year. So we're going to look at now over that 4-year cycle, try to develop some better metrics for what our needs are for temps and overtime. Our staff expenditures is about roughly half our budget for full-time staff and benefits is a little over a third of our budget. There's a lot of variables between the vendors that we use for ballot printing and mail ballots, for equipment delivery, and then a lot of variability with the temps that we use. Our overtime can vary. The number of temps that we need in a given election can vary anywhere between 4 or 5 temps up to 15 to 20 temps. So I want to try to look at that to help us kind of plan that out for the future. But on the positive side, I do feel like the county has supported us well with the, financial needs that we've had. We're going to continue to work on that.
Is the projected budget execution laid out on a month-by-month or quarter-by-quarter
It's
basis?
a quarter-by-quarter basis, yeah.
So it's not just assumed a linear glide slope from the beginning to the end?
Well, they do in
Because it's
the
clearly seasonal in the way it's
yeah,
executed.
they do so they do overall basically, at the quarter budget poll, what they do is anybody that is X percent below or above 25% has to provide an explanation. Now, we are one of the agencies that's usually provided that because, like I said, we're often ahead and behind that process, or those markers. Some agencies, it's much more, some agencies, they have X number of full-time employees. They don't have a lot of vendor costs. Their costs are pretty stable. Other agencies, I would say our agency, Parks and Recreation is probably a lot like that. The libraries, I think, are like that to some degree. Some of these agencies that really swing wildly from season to season, their programming and their financial needs change. So you will see, different agencies under and over consistently, and some agencies that are kind of have very steady payments. So, ours is just staff for a few months, and then all of a sudden, we have to send $100,000 to our mail voter vendor who's printing our ballots and mailing our voters out. We have to do all these different vendors that do the logistics around our election. The companies that do our cell phones, the companies that move our equipment. So we surge a lot around election time. So it
Does the state still pay all the localities for part of the cost of a presidential election?
They do, but if you'll remember, there was an article that they published, an email that I sent to Elect about that. There's a really good article. I think it's the Cardinal News. I believe they're in Southern Virginia somewhere. They did a whole article where they talked to 5 or 6 registrars about that reimbursement, because the reimbursement level for presidential elections has been, or presidential primaries, I should say.
That's just for primaries. Okay.
So that wouldn't have affected this fiscal year. That was last fiscal year.
Okay.
And thankfully, we did still manage to stay on budget. We were short by a couple $100,000, if I'm remembering correctly, for what we spent versus what we were reimbursed for. So I do think that there's work to be done on that to make sure that the localities are reimbursed properly, and that I don't know if that is I don't think that's a mechanism of elect. I think that is how much the state is allocated, and maybe that there's just not enough being allocated there. I would guess, because legislation often kind of hangs behind, things that are approved. We now have early voting and mail voting. That's a lot more logistical things to be responsible for. It costs some money, and I'm guessing the formulation probably needs to be updated for that. So we got most of what we spent in that primary, but we were shorted by a fair amount, and we had a lot of company in that, especially the large localities really had, all had pretty significant deficits for what they spent versus what they were reimbursed by the state for. All right, that's it for my report.
All right. New business. GREB duties.
Well, we had a discussion on this after the last meeting, and you all have a draft here. It's this one, a little yellow on the bottom there. You all wanted to modify some of the duties. I think if anything, it was pushing a number of the duties from either it being solely on me to duties that were more shared. And some of that was, I added some notes too, just about, the board's expectations about communications, if nothing else, around certain things. So I think I incorporated everything that you all had noted in that discussion, and I did highlight them all in here. Just one, I think it's helpful to be able to review that, and then two, it does give us a jumping point for the next year to see kind of what we had modified. Did it work? Did it not work? What else needs to be changed? So it kind of gives us a reference point for next year. So.
So I think you had most of the, is it, how's it look?
Good.
Okay. Do we need to adopt this today?
It's at your guys' discretion. You can
Okay.
adopt or not adopt.
Chairman, I move that we adopt the General Registrar and Electoral Board duties review as written.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. And
There's a
there's a sign.
copy up there for
All right.
signature. I think it's also, it's a template and a guide, but you all can go and, if there's something that's not working, we can, revise that at any time, so.
Okay. Election officer appointments.
Very small number this time, we have 5. So you all have, it's this single sheet. We have 2 Democratic applicants and 3 nonpartisan applicants for approval. We did not get any objections from,
Nope. This was the first time we heard from both parties,
okay.
and yeah, no objections or nominations.
It was real light work for them this time.
Yeah. It's a handful.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the new election officer applicants as presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, so we add those 5 people to Dina's pool. All right. Legal referrals.
Okay, so I think this was, you all had passed a motion the previous election, the previous meeting, to send a letter to the Commonwealth's attorney regarding clarification and explanation on some of our legal referrals we had made, so.
So on that, I appreciated, I was the one that made that motion last month, and there was some discussion afterward about what's the word I'm looking for? We'll use the word propriety, for lack of a better word, of referring provisionals to the Commonwealth Attorney. And the surface level, at least, analysis that I had done of the provisional rejections was what sparked that discussion. And Natalia and Eric both had raised some really good points about why that may not be what it seems. And in the interim between last meeting and now, they did some really good work digging down into the details of why those provisional ballots were rejected. And as far as I can tell, the counter arguments were compelling, and I can see the point. And so I think, from my perspective, and I'm open to discussion from the board, I don't see the need at the moment to refer any of the provisionals, at least not in terms of those that were cast apparently as a double vote, because there are a number of circumstances and scenarios where that could legitimately happen, just because of the way the current law is written, allowing absentee ballots, for example, to come in after Election Day. Somebody's very concerned at the very end, they haven't gotten confirmation that their absentee ballot was received, and so therefore they go and they vote in person. And then after all is said and done, as the Electoral Board is looking through all that, we see a provisional ballot as well as a very late, but still on time, absentee ballot. So that's kind of the thought process and discussion that went on for those. I do still have some questions about those who were prohibited matches, and I know that the staff was looking into that. That seems a little less clear to me, that somebody could be a convicted felon or adjudicated by a court to be mentally incapacitated and shows up and is somehow unaware of that, which would seem to indicate either a record-keeping issue at the courthouse, or maybe embarrassed, or maybe both. So I'm still not 100%. I don't understand that necessarily at the moment, and we're still looking into that. Long story to get to the end. I don't think referring provisional ballots at the moment is something that we need to pursue. That would be my position, open to the board. However, I'm still in favor of sending a letter to the Commonwealth Attorney asking for a written response as to whether or not she intends to pursue the 5, I believe, cases that were referred by the registrar's office in October that seem to be very clear violations of election law. And to my knowledge, we haven't heard from her office what she intends to do or why on that. And so I would still like to draft that letter, again, with the board's concurrence.
Yeah, I agree. I would want to see further clarification from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office about the things that we've sent them, and we haven't gotten a reply, so, yeah.
And also, speaking of further clarification, if the choice is not to pursue any of those 5, which we believe to be pretty clear cases of election law violation,
Why?
I would be interested in the Commonwealth's Attorney's view on what exactly would rise to the level of something that would be something she would pursue. If none of those cases reach that threshold, what is it that would?
Good.
So those were the 5 that you submitted in last fall,
Yeah.
right?
I think it ended up being 4. I think we withdrew one of them. We discovered later that one of them was not, that the person had not done anything. An officer had made a mistake with someone with a similar name.
That's right.
So we were able to reconstruct that, and we did withdraw one of them, but there were 4 ultimately. And I do think that having a discussion with them, I know, so just as an example, John and I had a meeting with someone from the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and our police contacts prior to the general election, talking about, concerns over harassment and security and that kind of stuff. And some discussions with them was helpful to clarify situations where they might intervene and press charges, So just as an example, the police are hesitant to pursue general harassment charges. They're hard to get them to stick. So it let us know that those kind of situations needed to be something very specific to the election law. So some of that was, some of those ongoing discussions I think are helpful to know. I talked to a couple of GRs at FIBA, and, had, one said their Commonwealth's attorney has told them not to refer provisional cases because technically the person hasn't broken a law. They haven't attempted to vote. They're voting a provisional ballot, which is reviewed by the board. So in their view, that person hadn't attempted to vote. There was another GR that said that they have referred, provisional cases at times. So I think there's a lot of interpretation involved, and getting more information from our Commonwealth's attorney about what would be the threshold for that, I think would be helpful, because on the one hand, we want to report people that are doing, illegal things for the integrity of the election process. We also don't want to add a bunch of paperwork to our staff, specifically me generally, to provide all that information to them if we're referring things that they already know they're not going to pursue based on what the legal standards are. So I think that any clarification they might provide would be helpful to achieving both of those ends.
And I can understand both of those positions. However, I do think it's not difficult to imagine a scenario in which the provisional ballot process could be abused. In which case, if there's ever clear evidence of that, I would absolutely be in favor of referring that sort of behavior to the Commonwealth Attorney.
Sure.
But in all 41 of the instances that we mentioned in the last meeting, there were 41 provisional ballots that gave at least some indication that there was an attempt to vote more than once. But the registrar and his staff looked into all 41 of those instances and categorized them into different scenarios, all of which had at least a reasonable explanation. And so, therefore, I withdraw that portion of what I would like to talk to the Commonwealth Attorney about. But the other 2 issues, I think, still stand from my perspective over to the board.
Yeah. You want a motion, or,
Sure. I will amend the motion from the last meeting to draft a letter to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office asking for her intentions on the resolution of the 4 cases that were submitted in October, as well as clarification on what rises to the level of actionable information where election integrity is concerned.
I'll second that motion.
all right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Do you want to take a draft?
Sorry?
You want to take the first cut at drafting a letter?
Absolutely. I'm glad
Okay.
to.
All right.
Yeah, I'm happy to help with some of the, factual data that's behind some of those too, if that helps. I think too, while we're on the matter of legal referrals, one of the things that struck me that that was a presentation at VIBA, that then was, something that I kind of considered and had written a note down about was the lack of sort of legal reference in our meetings. So as a point of reference, when I was in DC and when I was in Maryland, at our board meetings, we had, senior staff, we had the board, and then we also had an attorney at those meetings. And that attorney was valuable at times to provide, I'm an attorney, but obviously I have the interest of being the general registrar. And so having an attorney present in some of those meetings was often helpful, where, the registrar might say, I believe it should be this, and the board might say, well, we see the interpretation as this, and it's like, go to the lawyer for the call, was helpful. I think what was also raised at VIBA by one of the speakers, I don't remember who, was, when we get sued, we go to risk management at the state level, and they provide us with a lawyer. The county attorney has made clear that they represent the board and they do not represent this. There's some matters of interpretation there that may be correct or not. Regardless, we don't have representation when we're going into matters to sort of help us navigate those, to prevent being sued, or to, a lot of my legal education was not necessarily representing people, but you solve problems. Lawyers are really problem solvers at the end of the day. And sometimes that can be navigated outside of the legal system. I know a lot of the policies that the board has adopted, the election officer policy that I know we're talking about later, was, very much that reason. How can we solve this problem within the structure of the code in a way that meets the interests of all the parties that are involved here? Not the literal political parties, but all the people that are involved in it. So I think that's something worth looking into. And I know, I think one of you, Mark, I don't know who was, one of you had mentioned to me, hey, do we have that in the budget, or is that something we could put in the budget in the future? So I will check into that as an option for us as well, to see if that's something that we could have for either just general consultation or perhaps presence at a meeting. It might not be something that's too necessary in some smaller jurisdictions. We've had a number of lawsuits that I know I've had to handle during my time so far. So anyway, something for the future that we can look at.
Training.
Okay, so you all have a sheet that looks like this, and then a big grid here. And I want to thank John and Dina for all their work on this. We are posting the position for Tommy retired at in January, at the end of January, and we are shortly posting an opening for his position. But we've sort of gone into the selection with the idea that we likely won't have someone hired specifically for that position. So I appreciate John and Dina have been doing a lot to develop training videos, the training plan, curriculum around training, and I think they're doing a great job at that. So the overall plan for the primary election, now primary election under code, I don't believe anybody but the chiefs and the assistant chiefs have to have training, but it's been my position that we should have training for all officers before every election, because if something goes wrong, I can't go, well, the code doesn't require it. That's bad preparation, I think, on my part, on the board's part. So we want to make sure that our officers are trained, and we do take their feedback after each election to try to consider how we modify the curriculum, how we modify the structure. So there's a number of different classes. So if you are a regular election officer, let's say, you're going to go and you're going to take the Election Officer Essentials course, which is an online course that's going to cover all the basics that you need to know. It'll cover reminders about things that the officers make mistakes on. It'll cover any law changes, which we don't have anything from November this year. It'll talk about issues specific to primary elections. So that covers all of our returning officers that are experienced. If you are a new election officer, you will get a more specific course that's going to cover the same material that's going to be in the essentials class, but you're going to have more and you're going to get hands-on, and especially with the poll book. So we think it's really important that the officers get a lot of experience learning the poll book, going through scenarios. So if you're a new officer, you're going to go through that new election officer training. So those, for our regular EOs, those are basically the two courses that they are doing. That are in the plan here, I should say. If you are a chief or an assistant chief or an EPS, then you're going to go through, it depends on your particular scenario. So all officers have to get certification within the election year. So if they did not get it in November, then they're going to have to take that course before the June election. So everyone gets certified. That certification is basically good for a year, and then we reset that clock in July after the primary is done. There is a leadership brief that all officers have to go through. We used to do a Friday letter, which was sort of important reminders to chiefs, and it got to the point where that letter had so many things in it that we just decided it would make more sense to do it kind of in person. It allowed us to respond to questions that officers had. It gives me some face time with all those officers. It allows me to stress certain things that we found as training has gone along. Here are the challenges that we've discovered. Here are mistakes that we see officers making. Here are some particular things for this primary that you need to know about. Let's say we have a candidate that drops out or something like that. It allows us to convey that to all those chiefs. So we do that towards the very end of the election process. I think it's scheduled for what, about a week before?
Yeah, the week before, usually the Thursday or Wednesday before the election.
Okay. So they get that just a little less than a week before the election. It gives them some important reminders, reminds them to prioritize certain things. So all officers have to do that. And then they all have to have the certification, as I just mentioned. Now, if you're a new chief officer, we have a separate course for that, where you're going to get hands-on with the equipment, the paperwork, and the CO responsibilities. So you're going to have to do that, and you're going to do the certification as well. So you're going to be doing all of those things if you're a new chief officer. And then the new thing that we've added, which John and Dina have led on, is what they're calling the paperwork boot camp. And the paperwork at the end of the day is always the most challenging part. And I see Marcus nodding because he's been an election officer. The paperwork at the end of the day, when I started in Virginia and as a deputy director, and my director showed me the end of the day paperwork, I thought she was joking with me. I thought it was a joke and that she was just pulling my leg. There's a lot of paperwork, and it's necessary for things like chain of custody. It's necessary for validation of election totals and vote totals. And a lot of it is required at the state level, that certain things that we have to produce at the end of the day, but it's a lot for officers. So we've put together a boot camp specifically designed for that, so that the officers have extra training on that. Now, we've put this as a required, I don't think this is you can't work the election unless you do this, but I think this is a highly recommended, and I think that the officers will come in and want to do this course, because I think it's something that they struggle with.
Yeah, Eric, if I may. So this topic has been the #1 requested by chief officers in the post-election survey, so we want to go ahead and offer that course to them this go around. But also too, this is going to be the first time where we release a self-directed training option for them. It's going to be a 30-minute video that they have to watch. They can't fast forward, they can rewind, and they can watch as many times as they wish. And upon completion of that, they will receive credit for attending that training. And this will be a course that we will open up to anyone assigned to leadership roles.
And I think the last element of this is our open equipment workshop. So we always have a couple days towards the end of the election, towards the end of training, just before the election. Stumbling over my words a little today. And it's just an open session for officers to drop in if they want some more practice on a poll book, if a chief wants to run through how to open and close a machine. If they just have questions about the what-if scenarios or provisional voting process, they have an opportunity to come in and get some extra help. So that's just totally at their option, and something that we have open for all election officers to come in and get some additional in-person training. So I think overall it's a pretty good structure. I think the paperwork boot camp is an interesting addition. I think that rolling that out in a primary is a great time to sort of see from the officers how they like that. And I think that overall, in terms of training for the future, we do want to make sure that there's a lot of different elements to this, and having sort of a lot of variety of classes here to reach different audiences is a good way to do it. I think we used to not really have the new officer class, and so a lot of our new officers would struggle on the poll books because they weren't as familiar with them when they started. And I think that was a board, Keith, I think that was something you had pushed a couple years ago to make sure that there was more hands-on training on the poll books for the officers. But I do think that with all of these options, having some of them be online options is good. Now, for the Officer Essentials, that is a virtual class for, I guess it's both options. We have virtual classes for officers if it's easier for them just to log onto their computer and interact in that way, and they can ask questions and things like that in that process. But we also still do it live, because some of our officers just prefer to come into class and be in person, and I totally understand that. I think I would guess that probably the ones that are in person too are probably paying a little better attention than maybe the ones who are at home. But we do want to continue to develop kind of a multi-pronged approach of having in-person hands-on, of having virtual classes that give people some convenience, because we have so many elections that we're constantly having to have officers have training, and then also have some self-guided courses where officers can log on, practice, and learn. I think that helps to sort of manage the fact that everybody has different learning styles, and they learn in different ways. So having a lot of solutions that provide for that is a really good thing. So, did you want to add anything on that?
No, just know that the election officer essential class, the in-person part of that training will be done at McCourt, where we can hold about 100 election officers. So once we get approval and we can finalize our training schedule, we will go ahead and share that with you all, and you are always welcome to attend.
So which one of these is going to be focusing the most on same-day registration?
It's going to be the paperwork, any chief classes. So any leadership that hasn't been certified, they'll go through the certification class where we focus on provisionals pretty heavily. I'm adding a piece of that in the paperwork boot camp. I do have a 20-minute video available online already that was very well received this past November. And also in the new chief class. So anything with leadership will have provisional.
Okay. And do we pay the officers for one training, or how does that work?
At the moment, we only pay them for the certification classes, so we increase the stipend to cover that training just because it makes it easier for us in the back end when we're handling payroll.
Yeah, so as an example, we used, I don't know what the numbers are, so I'm going to make up numbers right now. But we used to pay $100 for, working and $30 for training, and we shifted it so it's just one payment for your service overall. And they do get extra money for the certification. Yes. The chiefs do get extra money for carding, for picking up the materials before the election. They get extra money for bringing it back after the election. So we do pay for those kind of elements that are extra. And the chiefs and the assistant chiefs also make more money, partly because they have more training requirements that they have to meet, and they have to invest more time, not only in completing their training, but also in communicating with the team before Election Day, and a number of things that
visiting the precincts.
Coordinating. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that they do beyond just Election Day as a chief or an assistant chief as well. So,
And when you're, at the end of the day, you're having 2 election officers bring all the materials
Yes.
back?
Yep.
Yes.
One of each party?
One from each party, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And that has come along very well ever since it was first introduced a couple
Yeah.
years ago.
It was not popular at
No.
first, right? Yeah. Everybody fought against it at first, and it was like, well, it's what we have to do now, so. But it's worked out well. I think we've only had a few instances where they didn't, where the precincts didn't meet that standard, so that's been really good.
Any other questions about training? Do we need to approve the schedule, or no, we don't have the schedule yet?
Just the
but,
training plan.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the training plan that has been presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
It passes, okay, thank you, and we look forward to getting the actual, I know you're moving in and out a couple times, but
3 times.
3 times? Okay.
Yeah. We'll get you all the schedule and the links so you can participate in the in-person and the online courses, especially with the 2 new board members, have a chance to kind of see how that works. I think that, when we have these discussions, it's great to plan ahead, but I think that going in there really helps you with saying, hey, I'd like to see this the next time around. So we will get that to you all shortly.
So does the code differentiate between in-person and virtual training? It just says everybody has to be trained one time before?
Yeah, it's just broad as to
Yeah.
some kind of training.
Okay.
It's not too specific. It's too specific. DC, we had number of hours you had to train. It was always a challenge.
Okay, ballot order.
Okay,
This is the orange.
so you all you have 3 kind of spreadsheets there. There's a blue, a green, and an orange. So this is the orange one. Thanks to John for drafting this out. He and I have had some discussions on it. There's always a fine art to creating a ballot order, which is sort of this balance between making sure we have enough ballots and also not wanting to overspend money needlessly. And so you try to find the middle of those 2 parts of the spectrum. Now, in terms of, and this will kind of apply to all these next few items here, in terms of our projections, so we have a projection for this election of around 48,000, 49,000. Now, so someone doesn't quote me, that is a planning projection for us. That does not mean we, think that many people will show up for sure. That is sort of a medium-high number of where we think it will likely land. If we're a little ahead of what we expect the traditional turnout to be. Primary turnouts can really vary. They're never huge like a general, but they can be as low as 6 or 7%. They can be as high as in the low 20s. And usually what we've seen in Prince William County is 12 to 15%. And it can really vary. There might be a particular candidate on ballots, and this can even vary by part of the county, that drives people to vote, or you might have a particular party that doesn't have much in the way of competition for certain races, in which case you would likely see, less turnout. But we plan for that, because that's solid, that's solidly above 15%. And then what we do for that is we go, okay, if that is our sort of medium-high projection, then how many ballots do we need to be comfortably over that? And that's always a challenge because, 1, you have to do it by precinct, and 2, you have to do it by party in this case. So primaries are actually a little harder for ballot order than general elections are, and for some of these other elements. So early voting and mail voting are easy. Those are all printed on a per-need basis. Our vendor prints all our mail ballots, and we do printer on demand for early voting. So the nice thing is that there's absolutely no waste. We have a certain stock of paper, and if we don't use it this election, we will use it in the next election. So one advantage to that is that there's no waste. Election day, we have to have enough ballots in the precinct to make sure we cover everybody. So what you're seeing here, precinct by precinct, if you look at the column where it says D ballot, ED order, and R ballot, ED order, That is how many we think we need for that particular precinct. We also have put just a standardized 100 provisional ballots and 100 test ballots for every precinct. The test ballots we use during logic and accuracy testing. The provisional ballots we have there, 50 of each party in both these instances for provisional voters. We probably won't see more than 5 or 10 provisional voters at the busiest provisional precinct during a primary. We'll have some precinct that'll have, none, 1 or 2. So if you look, you will see that the Democrat order and the Republican order really vary by precinct. If you look at precinct 101, which leans heavily Republican, we've ordered twice as many ballots, Republican ballots there as we have Democratic ballots. Whereas if you look down in, let's say, the 700s, like 710, Powell's Creek, you see there's 700 Democratic ballots and only 300 Republican ballots. So what we've tried to do is look at the total number of voters, estimate how many voters we're going to see overall. Then we break that down to a certain number of these voters are going to vote early voting or vote by mail. And then we have what's left are the likely election day voters. And from that total, we look at what is the likelihood based on recent elections that these individuals are going to be voting in the Republican primary versus the Democratic primary. Now we have open primaries in Virginia, so people can, cross over. There are independent voters who we don't always know, are they going to participate in that? Because we don't have registration by party in Virginia. But we've done as best we can here. Now the plus side too is that we do have, with our on-demand printers, on election day, if we had a precinct that was running low on ballots, we can print another 50 or 100 ballots. It's not a fast process, but we can do that. So what we do on election day is John and I will monitor the ballot usage precinct by precinct. They report hourly numbers to us. So we'll run that against our totals at the midpoint of the day, and then we'll see, okay, we've got these 3 precincts that are going to be close. Let's check in with them in another couple hours and see if there's a reason that we need to print ballots for them. But it is good we do have that as an emergency precaution. We prefer not to do that because there's, custody and things that have to go into it then. But obviously that is the better option than not having a ballot for a voter having to use a provisional ballot or something like that. So
For that, you'd use the same equipment you use for early voting, ballot on demand, where they, yeah.
yeah, it's the same printers. So we are expecting a higher-ish turnout of just under 50,000. And then what we have here is an order of about 110,000 ballots, 50,000 Democratic ballots, and 38,000 and change Republican ballots. And we think that will sufficiently cover the precincts that are, again, modulated a little for their size and then also their partisan lean based on past voting history.
I feel like this might be a stupid question. The provisional ballots in a primary, those have to be party specific as well?
Yeah.
And so the 100 that we order here, is that
50 for each
50.
party, yeah. Which in a primary, what's the highest number that we get out of a precinct, like 10?
I'm not sure, I can look it up.
Okay.
I'll give you an answer in a few minutes.
High, 10 will probably be
Yeah,
high.
yeah. I mean, I can't remember what our last election was, our last primary election was for provisionals. But it pales in comparison to the general. It's usually 1,000 or less, I would say, for a primary. But Natalia, you can pull that up, I think, and take a look.
And you're comfortable with 50-50 even, I guess we're not going to have as many SDRs in the primary as we will in November, so that's enough to cover any SDRs.
And
We can-
we can always print on the touch writer as well if we do start to run low.
Okay.
They can always use a regular ballot as
Yes.
well, and just make sure that the voter puts it in the envelope and doesn't put it in the scanner. I mean, the provisional ballots are really only provisional ballots. The only purpose that serves is that you can't put a provisional ballot through the scanner. That scanner has been coded and it knows when it goes through, is this a provisional ballot or a regular ballot? And if it's a regular ballot, it'll go through the usual protocol to accept that ballot if the voter has voted it, if there aren't any issues with. how the voter voted it. The provisional ballot is set up to automatically go, nope, this is a provisional ballot. And that's a really good feature, because I know years ago when I worked in DC, we did not have that, and so there were always a certain number of voters who were supposed to be voting provisionally that the officer would lose track of, and they, the voter drifts over to the machine, and they put in, and once it's in the machine, it's counted. So this is a security measure so that anybody that's supposed to be voting provisionally, assuming the officers give them the ballot they're supposed to be getting, then it will kick out.
So you're anticipating about 1,000 provisional ballots?
I would say less than that.
It's 267 on election day,
And
last
and yet we're
June.
ordering
Oh, okay.
10,000?
267.
Yeah, that's what I have.
The number of provisional ballots would be about 267.
267?
Yeah.
And yet we're ordering 10,000?
Yes, because you have to have at least 50. You got to print them in packs of 50.
That's the minimum order
Yeah.
per ballot style.
Okay.
Per the
They
vendor.
print on pads. So you can't print the ballot, when you're ordering ballots, you can't print ballots as a type in smaller numbers than that.
I see.
So it also helps us with accounting then too. If you had X number of, you have the pad with all those types of ballots that are all secured together. So if you gave out 7 provisional ballots, then that pad should still have 43 ballots on it. It doesn't usually come into play, but if you had a recount or some kind of issue that occurred, it helps with the accounting of those ballots afterwards. But yeah, that is really the big challenge. And that when we're talking about 100,000 ballots overall, part of that is because you have precinct specific and then party specific within that. And so we have to order them, we round them, by 100. So if we think we're gonna need 164 ballots at a precinct as our guess, well, we don't just wanna order 200 and be too close. We wanna go 300 and make sure we have enough in case maybe more people are voting one party or the other in this particular election.
Spoilage.
Yeah, so you have to have a little overage, and when we've got 103 precincts, and you can see there's 4 different kinds of ballots to order here. So inevitably, each precinct is gonna have 50 extra, 30 extra, 100 extra, and then you multiply that by each category. It's always a lot of extra. I think this is actually, last year we ordered, I think, about 140,000, so this is down from what we ordered the last year.
What happens to all of those extras at the end?
They live in the box 3.
Yeah, box
Box
6.
6, sorry, I get 3 and 6.
And
3 is the voted ballots,
then
6 are the blank ones.
We send those to the courthouse the day following the election, and they'll sit there, and the courthouse will then destroy them after the recount period or 30 days have passed.
They live a sad life inside of a dark box,
Yes.
in a dark room for the rest of their days until they're destroyed.
That's not part of the canvas though, is it? Like inventorying the box 6?
No.
Only if we would need to go in there for some kind of reason. If if paperwork for the officers, could not be found, then the board could authorize, point openness, but I don't think we've ever had to open the box 6s.
Yeah. Election officers are required to return the ballots and box number 6 and write the total inside that box. So they're required to provide an inventory of what's in the box if opened.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, one of the many pieces of paperwork to
Yeah.
be completed at the end of the day for the officers.
All right, so do we have a motion?
I move that we accept the ballot order for the primary, the dual primary in June, as presented.
Second?
All in favor, say aye. Aye, pass. Okay, next is staffing and equipment plan.
Okay, so do these together. The green is the staffing and the blue is the equipment allocation. I'll start with the equipment allocation because that's a little bit more straightforward. So, go ahead. Oh, yeah. Did all that stuff on the fly, okay. Okay, so in terms of the election equipment, we pretty much standardize it for the primaries. In a general election, we vary the number of poll books. We might have 3 or 4 check-in poll books at some precinct. But for a primary, one poll book is probably going to be enough to check in voters at most locations. Some of our busier ones will need 2. And all the chiefs do have a poll book as a backup. So our election equipment for our primaries has been standard. And we always do 2 check-ins just because if there's some kind of issue with the poll book, if the power supply goes bad, or there's some kind of issue where the keyboard's not working, or just some kind of hardware issue that we can't resolve, that way we have a backup. So every polling place, even if there is an issue with one poll book, has at least 2 poll books still to rely on. But the chief has a poll book for provisionals, and like I said, they're not going to have that many provisionals to handle. And then they'll have 2 check-in poll books for check-in at each location. We also just do 1 scanner per location. We haven't seen a need in past primaries for having an extra scanner at each location, and that really simplifies the results reporting on election night. When they only have to report what is on the 1 tape, and they don't have to add 2 tapes together, we see a dramatic decrease in the number of issues in terms of, addition and subtraction that they have to do. So 2 check-in poll books at each location, 1 scanner per location. And then we also will have, during LNA, we test, we set up 10 more scanners as backups. So if there was an emergency during early voting, if there was an emergency on election day, we could implement those. We also will have a few backup poll books. So if we did have a location where, their poll books went down, or they were having a power supply, or their power went out, or something like that, we would have a few poll books that we would be able to implement on election day itself.
Where are the backup scanners held?
They're kept at our warehouse.
Okay, so if you need one,
Yeah.
you drive to the warehouse?
Our staff will take that scanner from the warehouse to the location, and there's paperwork that has to be signed when it's dropped off at the polling place that the chief has to sign to verify the serial number. So when we do LNA, we do record all of the serial numbers and the seal numbers for all of the scanners that they're testing and getting ready for election day, so that can all be verified.
You answered my next question.
Okay.
So during LNA, everything that's tested is serialized, and then I assume there'll be another version of this with the actual equipment assigned, serialized to a location.
Yes, we produce a spreadsheet following LNA. The parties in the past have requested those spreadsheets, so we do share those and copy the board members on those emails.
Yeah, credit to John on that. Well, it's not something we're required to do, but he just started doing that
Seems like a
several
logical
years
thing.
ago.
Seems
Just
like a logical thing to do, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because they were asking us a lot of questions for the poll watchers, and it was like, well, why don't we just get everybody the sheet? So you can just distribute that to all your poll watchers, and then they'll all have the list of, what equipment is at each location. So there's a way to kind of streamline that validation.
And not to get ahead of the agenda here, but as we review the election officer policy, or just in general, the policy, making it clear what poll watchers are permitted to check. So if they have this information, they need to be allowed at some point to confirm that those machines are the ones that are on the list.
Yeah. Yeah.
And seeing the numbers on the poll book and checking them against the scanner, every hour on the hour, whatever the battle rhythm is.
Yeah.
Because I know that was just a huge point of contention the last time, and there was not clarity on both sides of the table of who's allowed to do what.
Yeah. In 15 years in elections, I've seen repeated, disagreements between poll watchers and officers about what they're allowed to access. And I will say that sometimes the poll watchers have not been trained correctly. Sometimes the officers are not remembering what they're supposed to do. That's why we have our guide where we try to clarify. I think we have 3 or 4 pages just on poll watchers and what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And not only that, but how to manage that as well. How to be, so just as an example, as a chief, you shouldn't automatically be contentious towards a poll watcher because they're there to do their job. You should communicate with them and try to work with them. And, they're there to do a job and you're there to do a job. And there are rules that govern that, and those are in the manual, and you can reference that if need be. And if they do have issues with that, we encourage them to call in to our support line to help negotiate that. And sometimes You know, sometimes I will contact you all and say, hey, we have a poll watcher who's having a, you know, if it's one of the ones from your party or your party, I will call you and say, hey, we have some contention out there. Would you guys mind going by, you know, precinct 308 and communicating with the, you know, the individuals from your party to see if we can't, you know, reach an accord and make this go a little smoother. So I can't presume that just because I'm the general registrar that our officers are always right. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're not allowing the poll watchers to, you know, be able to view and see what they need to see. And it goes the other way too. Sometimes the poll watchers are a little overzealous and they're asking for things that really are not requirements of us or that they're not allowed to see. So
And I think by clarifying as much of that as we can in black and white and then insisting that both sides of the counter adhere to it,
yeah,
I think we'll remove a lot of that predisposition to be adversarial maybe.
yep.
I think that'd be a good thing.
So what was the issue that poll watchers weren't, they couldn't check the serial numbers on the equipment, or what was
No,
the?
the last election, it was verifying the check-in numbers on the poll book with ballots scanned.
Okay.
Which, of course, the precinct is supposed to do that every hour.
Right,
And the poll watchers wanted to see the number on the poll book and see the number on the scanner. And a number of the precinct chiefs weren't having that. And so there
okay.
was just the back and forth on that.
right,
It caused a little bit of unnecessary tension.
yeah.
Yeah, John reminded me too that the backup scanners are carried by the rovers on election day. So they do have a backup scanner. Those are our election officers that are, basically they are going around the county providing support to the chiefs on election day. So they provide some eyes and ears for our office, and they will provide support to the officers in situations like that, but they also do carry a backup scanner. And then, John, we have a couple extras at the warehouse as well, right? Beyond the
Yes.
backup scanners that the rovers have.
Well, usually we just have enough to give the rovers.
Oh,
but
okay.
In a bigger election, we would.
Yeah, because we have more rovers now than we used to. Okay.
How many special assistants this year for the primary?
We're planning on 10 for this election. Presidential election was a big one, so we wanted them to visit precincts more often than they do in other elections. So we'll go back to 10 for primaries, just based on election officer availability, and go to 12 during November generals.
Yeah. We've kind of increased that, I think, steadily over the past
Yes.
couple of years. Do you know what it was 3 years ago? Like 6?
It varied.
Okay.
Because those special assistants or rovers will be the first ones that we pulled if we needed a chief at a precinct.
Yeah.
And the chief will also have the tablet for election night reporting,
Yes.
Yes.
in
Yep.
addition to the EPB.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, staffing. Any other questions about the equipment? No. Okay. Staffing. Primary is always an interesting challenge. On the one hand, you don't need as many officers as you do for a general. On the other hand, Dean and Rick have to work really hard because the summer is the time where it's really hard to get people. People are on vacations and different things going on. So our dropout rate is much higher during the summer elections. But what we're looking at right now is a need for just shy of 600 officers for this election. Basically about 6 officers for most precincts and 5 for a few of our smaller ones. What this allows for is a chief officer, assistant officer, and an EPS at all precincts. So 3 staff that are trained to open the equipment, to handle provisional ballots, and those chief and leadership duties. And then we plan to have 1 poll book officer, 1 scanner officer, and 1 greeter, and those can kind of rotate to the positions that the chief feels like they most need them in. That CO, that assistant chief, and that EPS during the day then, they're gonna have to rotate to different positions as well. So I imagine that sometimes, in some precincts that are busier, they might have the AO as another poll book officer. Maybe maybe they're finding more people need help at the booth, so the EPS is helping out people that are having questions about how to complete their ballot at the booth. But they'll kind of rotate based on need. But I think that honestly, if you have 1 or 2 poll book officers, somebody to cover the provisionals, and then 1 other officer to kind of help float to those other positions, I mean, most of our precincts are probably going to be seeing, 200 or 300 voters on election day. If you break that down over the course of the day, that's only 20 to 30 per hour. So it's not a super busy election. To be honest with you, primaries, we often have to have more issues with disagreements between poll watchers and officers, or disagreements between the officers themselves. When you're busy during the general election, you don't have time for any of that. But suddenly, personality things start to pop up in primary elections and special elections when things are much slower. So I think this will give us enough coverage, because I think that for most precincts, 3 or 4 active officers is really what's needed throughout the day. And then we have a couple more officers than that at all these precincts to rotate those duties so that somebody can jump on the poll book while somebody gets lunch or a break. It also provides enough people the time you need a little more, the 5, 6, 7 people is really at the start and end of the day when you're kind of getting everything set up and closing down. And from a staffing standpoint, when we're looking at this list, if we have, 6 people assigned to precinct 101, then the election officer team they're trying to start off with 7 there, so that we have some extras. And then as we get down towards election day, we'll lose some people, and we're not caught in a position where we're understaffed, but we lose a person and then where we're supposed to be. Or the precinct next door lost 2 people, and we still have an extra person from this precinct, so we're going to call them a week before the election and see if somebody can shift over at the last minute to make sure that we've got coverage.
And these will also cover curbside voting, in other words, leaving inside and walking out to the car.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
Yes.
time-consuming thing.
Yeah, I think that's generally going to be the chief and the assistant chief, and they'll have a few of those. But it's kind of like provisionals. It might only be a couple hundred voters across the whole county. I think, partly I think a lot of the curbside voters have been using early voting more and more. So we see a lot of curbside voters at early voting, and then we just don't see as many on election day as we used to. But it does really vary by precinct. If you're in a senior community, you might see more curbside voters than you would in, a younger community in another part of the county. So, and then one of the things we do monitor on election day is we do have a certain number of backup officers that we have kind of on call. So if we have a location that, oh man, they're getting a lot of curbside, we need another person, they'll call us up and we'll send an officer out to that location. So we have some flex there in terms of what we're prepared for.
And some of these locations don't have greeters assigned. What's the thought process behind those that do and those that don't?
I think it's just some of the locations that are really small.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Unity Reed, for example, there's only 1,380 registered voters there. So if it was a real blockbuster of a primary, we might see 250 people. But there's just not as much of a need. And the greeter, scanner, booth, those are all kind of interchangeable. I think you generally want to have a person by the scanner, because if people have a ballot that gets rejected, you want to be able to catch that before a person leaves the precinct. But somebody being near the booths and somebody being the greeter in a lighter election like a primary isn't really a necessity, but we do want to have kind of enough people that they can rotate to whatever the particular needs are for that precinct. Maybe the room is set up in a way where it's harder to see where the booths are, and in that particular precinct, that person's just going to be kind of directing the voters to where the booths are. Maybe another precinct has a lot of curbside, and so they choose to have that person, that greeter person, spend more of their time on curbside. But I think with the 3 leadership teams not being assigned to anything but provisionals, which is only a small portion of the day, as the day goes on, that really frees them up to sort of rotate to where that is needed. If they need more people to check in, if they need somebody at the booth, they can make that adjustment.
Okay. And so similarly to the equipment, eventually we'll get to a more detailed list with names and party affiliations at each precinct.
And
Yep.
we are currently working on that, so you
Yeah.
should see something pretty soon.
Okay, great.
Have we, are we going to be using student pages? I know we've sort of gotten away from that for the last couple of years.
We typically
For-
don't use them for primaries,
Okay.
but general elections, we suspended that for the presidential, but we haven't had that discussion yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the plan was just we suspended that during the presidential, just with some of the heightened tension and security concerns around the election. I didn't want to we didn't know what the voter behavior would be like, or if there would be the potential for violence, or, I mean, we saw some voters leading up to that where they usually isolated incidents, but I didn't want to put a student in a position where their safety was potentially compromised, or where, people put things on social media and then they take on a life of their own. I didn't want to put a student in a position where they might have somebody accusing them of something just based on a picture they took at a precinct. So I think, thankfully, the cooler heads prevailed. The 2024 election general went pretty smooth in terms of, safety and security. And I think the plan is to bring that back in the upcoming general election. But I don't know what the reason we don't do it for primaries is, outside of, it's probably hard to get students when they've just gotten off school.
That's true. They're all at the beach.
Tell them they have to go back to school next week. It's not going to be a popular program. But during the general, it's great. And we do get a lot of participation from teachers, and we've had, I don't know, Dina, do you have a number of how many students participated in like the 2023 general?
I think it was about 100.
Okay.
20 maybe, but
Yeah.
it was 40 the year before that coming off COVID. So
Yeah, okay.
It's going to keep going up.
Yeah. So I think the plan is to bring that back in the general. And that's been great. And the students, I think the officers enjoy working with the students, and the students get a good educational experience out of it. And so good program all around.
So, one of the biggest challenges we had last June was all the school construction. So I guess that, will hopefully, the schools will notify us on a timely basis so that we can address it, early enough.
Yes, so our facilities coordinator is currently communicating with the schools, and they said they should have a better idea towards the end of this month. The initial number that has been given to us is about 10 schools where the voting room may have to move, but still stay within the same facility.
Right.
So once we get more information, we'll forward that to the board.
And we have some additional signage now that we can use for those locations where we've got, a change in the room. Maybe voters are going in a different entrance than they're used to. Provide that signage at those locations to kind of direct them, hey, you've got to go around the back to the gym instead of through the main entrance. So that's really helpful, because if you've been voting in a certain place, a certain room for 5, 10, 15 years, then, want to make sure that gets communicated to voters.
Okay. Do we have a motion for election officer staffing and equipment allocation?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we accept the general plan that has been submitted here this morning with a more detailed plan forthcoming.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye, passes. So, next is election officer policy discussion.
All right, so this was implemented originally in 2022. I think the predominant reason at the time was to work to cure the partisan difference in our officers. We have typically, in the voting data, it showed we have more Democratic voters than Republican voters in Prince William County. Our election officer applications and participants had skewed in a similar proportion, and we did take on a number of efforts to recruit and bring those numbers even, and have succeeded in that. And this is something that's continued to evolve. I think it does a number of things. It makes sure that we meet that partisan standard. It establishes communications processes for our office staff between us and you all as a board, and also the party chairs, so that everybody gets updates on what Marcus was just talking about, which is that, you know, the staffing plan gets communicated to everybody at specific intervals. It also makes clear the expectations for me and my staff as to what the standards are for our officers and what it is they have to do. It also specifies the removal process, that we have a number of reasons why officers, thankfully we've not had to do this often, but we've had to remove officers for everything from failing to follow the procedures they're supposed to follow to intentionally trying to tamper with the equipment to see if they could hack it, so to speak. So, so we have kind of built this and added to it a little bit each year, and I think it's really helped with assuring the local parties that we're being fair in our process. I think it's helped the board to establish the expectations for me and our staff and what we're supposed to do. And it's helped to just improve our officer pool overall and laid out what the expected behavior is of our officers, which is, you know, neutral, fair, professional, courteous. So I think it's been a good thing. In yellow in the copy you all have in front of you is the staff and myself went through it and looked at, some of them are grammatical tweaks, some of them are suggestions from the staff. Probably the largest one is the establishment of a performance policy to measure the performance of our officers, and we do that in a number of ways. And in the paperwork that we received and how well it's filled out, in the surveys that the officers are sent where they are evaluating our training, they're evaluating each other, they're evaluating their precinct leadership. Those are all tools that help us, and I think this is kind of, the hope is to lay that out here as a board policy, which I think helps when we're communicating that to the officers, that this is not only something that we want to make sure that we're giving our voters the best service that we can. And our community survey results are showing that that is working, that we are giving really good service, given our improvement from 2021 to 2024. But also that this is the expectation of the board as well. It helps Dina with a little more weight and gravitas when she's talking to our officers and letting them know, hey, this is not just coming from me. This is from our director. This is from our board. These are the expectations that we have if you're a Prince William County election officer. And there's no timeline for this, as this is. I don't think there's many counties that have a policy like this, so I think it's a good thing that we have. And I know I've sent this to a number of other GRs over the last couple of years and have explained to them how it has helped us in a number of ways.
Reading through this, I think it's really good. So I commend the previous board and your office for putting this together. There are a couple of things that I want to consider a little more before we approve it, if we may. For instance, second full paragraph on the second page, we talked about this before, overseeing the process to ensure representation of the two parties are equal at each precinct. As I indicated previously, perhaps adding some additional verbiage as an additional goal, that precinct leadership, specifically chief officers, equally distributed across the 103 precincts, plus or minus one. Obviously, with 103 precincts, it'll never be exact. And also taking into consideration with that goal, officer availability, willingness to serve in that role, experience, skill, and aptitude for it. So not tying ourselves to it necessarily, but certainly expressing it as a goal.
So you're saying you'd have, if we have 102, we'd have 51 Democratic chiefs and 51 Republican chiefs.
Well, one party would have 52 and the other one would have 51.
Right, but yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Just an equal balance of the senior leadership across the 103 counties. Currently, it's weighted about 65-35, and that's been the trend for the last 5 elections as far as I can ascertain. So just trying to tip that a little bit and make it a little more even.
Yeah.
Third full paragraph from the bottom, the policy shall be supplied to the chairs on approval and serve as a notice that some nonpartisan officers will be used in all elections. Should that be may be used? It's an option for us if we can't meet the stipulations of the second paragraph from the top, that we would have equal representation of the parties varying by no more than 1 whenever possible and practical.
I think it's a will. I think this one's specific. I think it's a will because we have to some degree. Because one, I mean, Dina, correct me if I'm wrong, but the nonpartisan pool, is that our largest pool of officers?
It was, we're starting to.
They're starting to bleed in. Okay.
Yes, the last year we've done a good shift with our recruitment and contacting them and asking them
Yeah.
for recruitment and updates that probably.
We've had to push because it's like, get in the party if you want to be, assigned. It just, it's just a better chance. But it also is helpful in situations where, let's say you lose an officer, and let's say you have 3 Republicans and 2 Dems, and you have 3 and 3, and you lose one of those party members, and the only people you have that are of a party are other representatives of that party in that precinct. And so if you put the nonpartisan officer in, that still meets the code demand, because the code says it has to be basically plus or minus 1, even or plus or minus 1. So it helps with that. But also, we do use a certain percentage of them. If we have an odd number, then we're starting off, if our goal is 5 for a precinct, then we're going to start off with, 2, 2, and 1 as our base, and then we might have a backup of one of those groups as well. So I think this is a intention that, given the large group of them, given that I don't remember, I think it's rare that we have a precinct that doesn't have at least one nonpartisan person in it. If we have 103 precincts, I would guess in a given election we're only going to have 5 or 10 precincts that don't have some kind of nonpartisan person in one of those precincts. It just helps with balancing the numbers, and it's also just, if they're a huge pool to draw from for staffing. So, did you have anything to add, Dean?
Well, the basic line is we don't have enough Republicans. So if we have, in the general only 10 or 11 officers, we don't have 5 Republicans. It's impossible, so we can't meet the code. It's just not possible.
Yeah.
We have to use minorities in the larger elections.
Yeah.
So just keeping the EPSs for the generals, it's just, we have less of them in the primaries, but it's impossible in the general.
Plus, too, we have to assign them pretty early on just so they can go ahead and sign up for training. We do start training earlier than most localities just based on us not having a dedicated space to conduct training. So we want them to sign up as soon as possible. We want to know where we stand, way ahead of time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and we provide you, I can't remember where it is. What's the timeline for when we provide the board their first thing? Is it 6 weeks?
8 weeks out.
Okay.
And we should have something pretty soon.
Okay. So yeah, that was intentional, just because we always use some, nonpartisan officers. Although we have conveyed over the past couple of years, especially, that given what the code says and given the need for balance, that officers that are representing a party do get preference. That made a lot of officers mad, but that's what the code is. So, and I think that a lot of this too, to give you all the history, until about 5 years ago, this really wasn't, like, the parties just weren't participating in this in any way, shape, or form. So jurisdictions were doing whatever. Maybe their officers, they were just going, yep, you're a Republican, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a Democrat. Or maybe they were giving a preference, but somebody might switch. And we might tell them, hey, we need one more person to represent this party. Okay, I don't mind representing that party. Okay, great, you're that representative. And that was not a that was not anything deliberate to circumvent the code. That was that for probably I mean, Keith, you might know best, but for decades, the parties were not really nominating anybody. And since there isn't any party registration in the state as a reference point, we have no way as a staff to know who is a Democrat, who's a Republican, and who is neither. So part of this policy was sort of to, not only to do the things I talked about, but also to make sure that the parties were participating in this. Because I think my concern is that things in election happen for these little cycles. They become a thing for the moment. Election integrity has been a thing for the past few years. Long lines were a thing for a few years. And my concern is that we've crafted this policy, the parties have participated in it. My concern is that that is going to wane, and that's going to fall off at some point, and it's going to kind of go back to people not caring. And I think our policy has kind of covered that. If the party if we're providing the parties their chance to object, and if they're not objecting to someone representing them, then they have acquiesced to the board at that point to follow on the wishes of what that particular voter has requested. But it is, it's been a challenge. It'll continue to be a challenge. And I think that those nonpartisans are going to be, they're necessary to make sure that the whole thing, we need all three groups to staff the election, to make sure it's staffed.
In that case, I would move that we table this until next month so that we can, over the next 30 days, collectively edit this document as desired.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. So one, before we move on, so I don't see it in here, but I think at the time, we had a discussion about that it was the elections office that made decisions on actual placement of people in precincts and not the parties. So the parties that don't have, they approve someone representing them in the precinct, but the parties don't have a role in assigning which precinct specific individuals get assigned to. And so I'll work on something on.
Keith, it is on the second page. It does say party chairs specifically. Chairs do not nominate election officers for specific locations or assignments, and temporary staff in the office are the sole discretion of the chair. So the idea is that the assignments themselves are done by the staff, and then this also provides that at multiple points, the staff provides those assignments to the board, and then the board can make, decisions about changing those if there are some concerns about something. Hasn't generally been a problem, but that is, you're all's right. You all preserve that right. But I know we did have a problem a few years ago where one of the party chairs was contacting the officers directly and telling them to go to locations that were not where our office had told them, and the officers were calling up and saying, "I'm confused. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to go on election day." So we specified that specifically, that the party chairs do have the final say on if somebody applies to be a Democrat or a Republican and the party chair doesn't want it, they can strike that down. They cannot allow that person. That is absolutely their right. But once that person is nominated, then it's the board's responsibility to make sure that staffing is done correctly, and where those people are assigned are the domain of the board, and the board has dependent on our staff to communicate with what is 500 to 1,000 officers to make sure those are in place. But you guys will get shortly a list, like you were saying, of here is every location and every officer that's assigned, and then we do, I think, a list again at, I think it was 10 and we changed it to 17. It was 2 weeks and we changed it to 17 days. And that was specific to give a little more time for the chairs. The chairs technically can raise an objection to somebody, I think, if somebody's assigned and they could raise an objection. They can do that by 10 days before the election. So this would give them a week to review that. So I think it gives everybody the time they need to do that. But you all will see that list. I think it's at least 6 weeks. It's 8 weeks is the initial is the numbers that we're doing today. The policy says that by 8 weeks I'll provide you with a staffing plan for you all to approve, which is what we've done today. And we're about, I don't know, what, 10 or 11 weeks out now. By 6 weeks or sooner, by at least 6 weeks, that we'll provide the board with a individualized staffing list of who's assigned to where. I'm sure you all will have that. Dean and Rick usually have that well before 6 weeks. And then again at 2 weeks is 17 days. Is that imminent, Dina?
Yes, our assignments are going out Monday,
Okay, okay.
as long as we're approved.
Huh?
Yeah, and we're approved here.
Yeah, yeah.
So, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
So we, a year or so ago, we actually did a mailing based on people who had voted in a Republican primary, specifically targeted. You know, we've tried different ways to try and increase the number of Republican officers. And we may you may want to consider doing that again after this primary. Anyone who votes in the primary this June on either side is probably a hardcore D or R. And depending on the turnout, you may want to think about doing another mailing specifically looking for Republican election officers.
Yeah.
And if we put Heidi's name on it, you know, the Heidi Syrup name will bring in all these people. Oh, well, Heidi's asking me to be an election officer. So.
Yeah, the previous letter, we had the Republican board members were the ones that signed it, and it came from them to help, encourage more. So that's been one of a number of things that we've done to sort of equalize that. But also just overall get more officers. I mean, when I remember when I started, I saw our officer list and I was like, this is it? This is all we have? This is not good. So we've gotten more officers in general, but we've also done that in a way to get Republicans to be a higher portion of that to try to even some of those things out, so. Okay.
Could I request that when those lists, when those more detailed lists are published or at least provided to the board, can we also get them in digital format like Excel?
Yeah. Yeah, we can do it. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anyone for public comment today? Anybody sign up? Or
No
okay.
one signed up.
Sure.
You don't need to.
Identify yourself.
I'm Carol Novel, and I have been previously election officer for at least a decade, working at local precinct, early voting, the library, Colvin High School once upon a time. And I think the fact that I'm the only one here reflects the confidence of all the staff and excellent training and so forth that gets done. And I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, so I watch very closely, statewide, locally, and so forth. So I just wanted to compliment you. I have no clue why I'm here today. So that's what my conclusion is.
All right,
So thank you.
thank you.
Could you spell your last name, please?
Spell my last name?
Yes, ma'am.
Noggle.
N-O-G-G-L-E. And Carol?
It should be N-A-G-G-L, of course, because it's German, but that's the anglicized form.
So N-O, you said?
N-O.
Okay. And Carol, C-A-R-O-L?
C-A-R.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Noel. Thank you.
All right. So I understand we have a couple of items for a closed session.
Just one, just the security policy.
Okay. All right, so thank you all very much for coming. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Secretary, I move that we move into closed session pursuant to Virginia State Code, Section 2.2-3711-Alpha 34, for the purpose of discussing issues related to local election security standards.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you all. We will go into closed session for a brief, hopefully, discussion.